One of the most well-known yoga postures in a class is child's pose, or Balasana in Sanskrit. And it's usually pitched as a resting pose or a pose that you can come to if you're feeling a little bit tired in the class. And lots of people would say that they find child's pose relaxing, that it's soothing, that they feel really comfortable in it. But some people don't. And if you're constantly being told that this is a resting pose or a pose that you can come into at any time you like, and it's uncomfortable for you, often the thing that people will think is, what's wrong with me? Why is child's pose uncomfortable for me? So I'm going to break down some of the really common things that can come up in the body in child's pose and how you might get around it so that you can get that comfort that everyone's always talking about in child's pose. So the first thing that I'm going to do is show you what somebody's child's pose might look like if they're coming up against compression. Compression is where you've got things, usually bones and flesh, pushing against each other in a pose, stopping you from going any further. So what that probably looks like in child's pose for some people, particularly if they're told they're supposed to do child's pose with their legs together, and they come down into child's pose, it might look a little bit like this, where the hips are lifted up high and the heels and the buttocks are quite far away from each other. So often what yoga teachers will do in that instance is come over and try and push the hips down, which I very much recommend against until you know what's going on in that student. So if that's what's going on, and someone's buttocks are lifted up, the first place that I would want to check in with them is, are they feeling a strong sense of pinching at the front of the hips? Because if they are, they're probably coming up against a compression where the front bony part of their hip, which you can feel with your fingers, and their thigh flesh or their femur bone is compressing together in a way that's stopping them, and so their hips lift at the back. You might already be thinking, yeah, that's where I'm feeling that when I come into child's pose. If things are compressed in any kind of yoga posture, you can't just keep forcing yourself in that direction because there's nowhere to go. So if things are compressed in the body, you have to make space. And the most obvious way to troubleshoot this would be widen the legs. So it's really important in a yoga class that you've got options. Not everybody is going to feel good having the legs together, and by widening the thighs, those compressive body parts will probably move away from each other, and then maybe that person might be able to get their forehead to the floor and their buttocks are a little bit heavier. So that would be the first place that I would want to troubleshoot, the hips. The second place, which is a little lesser known place, is the ankles. So somebody might be in their child's pose with the hips lifted, and we could look at that and assume, you've got compression in your hips, widen the knees, but that might not actually solve the problem for them. It might actually be coming from the ankles. So I'm going to show you a little something here that's a good way for you to check and see if that is what's going on for you in your body, or if that might be what's going on for your students' bodies if you teach yoga. And it is to check and see how level the top of their shin is with the top of their foot if they were to extend their leg out in front of them sitting and point their foot. Now, if somebody is pointing their foot and the shin bone and the top of the foot are fairly level, then the ankle's probably not going to be an issue for them in their practice. However, if it looks a little bit more like this, which is common, you can see here that the shin and the top of the foot are really at quite different heights. Now, if you then take your mind and transfer, let's say that my arm now is the floor, pushing down against the shin and the top of the foot, that's going to cause a lot of pain here at the front of the ankle because the foot can't go any further. So how do we get around that? Well, the first thing that you want to do is ask. If you're coming into child's pose and the hips are quite lifted, or maybe they're not, but you're feeling pain, where are you feeling it? Because if you're feeling it in the ankles, this is probably what's going on. So I have a couple of props here. You may not have little towels with you in your yoga class, but I brought them for you. A couple of socks can work really well, or something else that you can use in the practice. And what you want to do is actually prop the front of the ankle. So if I came into my child's pose and I could slip these little towels under the fronts of my ankles, sometimes that is the magic ingredient to reduce that compression so that people's hips might be able to come down a little bit deeper. And look, they might need a combination of the legs being wider as well. And this might be the ticket for them to get a little bit closer to the ground. You don't want to prop the top of the foot. Make sure it's the front of the ankle. Now, with that in mind, I'd also like to flag that situation at the ankle will definitely come up in a kneeling position, so in Virasana. It will also come up in something like reclined Virasana or saddle pose in a yin yoga context, or even that half saddle position. So this can be a real source of painful obstacle in a certain yoga shape, but if we prop it, it might actually then create an access point. So this situation here could be problematic for somebody who's got that kind of presentation in their ankle. So it's always great to have a couple of little soft somethings nearby if this is what's going on for you. So those are the two major compressive things that can turn up for people in child's pose. Remembering that if something is compressive, it's going to be felt on the same side that you're moving toward in that joint. So hips and ankles tend to be the hot spots if compression is the issue in child's pose. If it's tension, however, which is not as common but does happen, it's going to mean that someone's hips are lifting up because the muscles at the back of their body are so tight they won't stretch and yield. Now that might be the back, that might be the lower back, predominantly in this position. So if someone's got a lot of tension and the body won't stretch anymore, we need to bring the ground up a little bit closer to them, and that's when a bolster can be very helpful. So in child's pose, what might be helpful if you're feeling a very intense tightness along your back tissue could be to widen the knees like we did before and bring the bolster in just in between the legs so that when you come down, your muscles in the back don't have to stretch that far for you to meet something, which is the prop. Now, there could be some people that need even more height than that, and you might need a second bolster, which is totally fine. So it's really important that whenever we're practicing these postures, as basic as they might seem, that we have things available and options available in our bodies so that we can find the best shape that suits our bones and that suits our muscle story. If you found this troubleshooting posture work helpful today, you can get more of that over here, and don't forget to subscribe.